from the Russian perspective, they don't trust the United States. Yeah, are they happy to see Trump saying some of the things that he's been saying? And no NATO for Ukraine, and this war, the Soviets won the World War II. And yeah, they're happy that he's saying that. They're not sure that he actually believes that deep down. The United States got a lot of dirt on its hands, and the Russians haven't forgotten that. And here's Trump, it was stupid on his part, bragging, oh yeah, I'm the one that provided those javelins to the that they used to blow up Russian tanks. Keep quiet on that. They didn't win any debating points with the Russians. And the Russians control what's happening on the ground. They are not in a position where they're losing so many troops. Oh, we can't sustain this. Their economy's growing 4.1% minimum, probably closer to 4.7%. Yeah, they've got some inflation, but people's wages are going up. They had the highest number of automobile purchases ever last year. People going out buying new cars, not exactly the signs of a country suffering. And the fact of the matter is, Russia has not mobilized as a nation for war. When you mobilize for war, that means everything else takes a back seat. Fighting the war is the number one priority. The war being waged, the special military operation, is not the number one priority. It's a top priority, but it's shared. It's split among other issues. And they know that Trump he'll be there for 4 more years maximum, assuming he survives in office. When he's gone, then what? So and then they got the last, since the collapse of the Soviet Union now, they got 35 years of bad taste in their mouth of how they've been betrayed by the United States repeatedly over and over. It's not Russia that's been trying to subvert the United States. It's been the United States trying to subvert Russia and putting lots of money into that effort, up to and including all the money USAID has poured into Ukraine, money it was putting into Georgia and Romania in order to shape elections that would be anti-Russian, reported helping funding of the Chechen war to fight and kill Russians. And Trump and company, I don't think, they don't appreciate that the Russians are saying, look, we've made our negotiating position very clear. Ukraine has got to pull all of its troops out of our new oblasts. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, pull them out, stop the fighting, elect a new government so we have someone legitimate to talk to, because Zelensky's not legitimate. His violation, your constitution says you only get a 5-year term, and that's it, one term. After that, you no longer run. His term has come and gone, and yet he continues to operate. This was their first date without the chaperone. And appeared to go well. They spent 6.5 hours at the U.S. consulate there in Istanbul. And I suspect the next meeting the Russians will host at maybe their embassy in Ankara or their consulate in Istanbul. They may pick up some other so-called, quote, neutral site. But this is now at the working level. And the focus was, we haven't got a lot of details, but it was said that it was to focus upon getting the diplomatic relations restored back to normal, so that you got a full complement of diplomats, so that each side can have all of their CIA and SVR personnel, staff in the embassy, get back to routine spying, so we can have that up and running once again. But again, the United States is not in a position to fight Russia either. Hell, we can't even handle the Houthis. I was talking with a friend earlier today, and he brought up a point that I hadn't thought of. If you go back and look at what public opinion was in Russia during the war, back when it was the Soviet Union and the war was underway in Afghanistan, you had public protests among the Russian people about that war. And you had really some rancor in the ranks. The soldiers were unhappy. The Russians only lost over a 10-year period like 18,000 people. They've lost 6 times that many in the course of the last 3 years. They got at least 100,000 dead. And yet the Russian people recognize that, hey, this is important to us. And I'm sure that one of the issues, they may not have admitted it in public yet, but one of the issues that the U.S. and Russian delegations will engage is what to do about Iran. And the status quo has changed from what it was when the JCPOA agreement was in place and Trump walked away from that, to the relationship that now exists between Iran and Russia, and Iran and China. Lavrov is briefing the Iranians, that both, not just Pezeshkian, the president, but the IRGC and senior diplomats as well, on, okay, this is what we're talking to the United States about. But the really important relationship is Iran and Russia, that they are putting aside years. There was conflict for some years, and they didn't get along. But now they're getting along in a variety of ways. We've seen Iran supply the Shahed drones to Russia, at least the technology. So there's been an exchange of military technology back and forth. The economic status of Iran is being assisted now by Russia, and there's a way to circumvent sanctions. And so Russia's just making it clear to them that we're not going to sell you out, and we may even help facilitate a dialogue with the United States. Because what the U.S. keeps, Iran's not going to get a nuclear weapon. It looks like Iran is not trying to get a nuclear weapon, and now with this relationship with Russia, I think it makes it even more unlikely. They're going to be less likely to get a nuke because they basically got Russia covering their back. Nor is it going to be the same. That's what Germany faces. It has broken the relationship, that glass that was the relationship between Russia and Germany. That's broken. Before, you go back 3 years before the start of the special military operation, there were, Siemens, for example, was making critical machinery, turbine engines and such, for Russia. And Russia was happy to buy them, and in exchange was providing cheap gas and oil that was allowing Siemens to operate and make a profit. So, yeah, I'm sure Germany, there are some in Germany that, man, can we get back together? But it's not going to be the same relationship. The original, the pristine glass is broken. It can be pieced back together perhaps, but it's not going to be the same as it was before. Then when the sanctions were imposed and they cut off that relationship with Russia, it left the Russians in a quandary. What do we do? And they said, we'll build our own. We got the smarts, we got the resources. It wasn't like the Germans had some sort of magic sauce. Oh, you got to have that secret sauce to put on it, or otherwise it doesn't work. So all of a sudden now Russia is producing internally what it used to buy from the Germans. So let's say they go back and say, okay, yeah, we'll reconnect the lines, but they're not going to go back to the economic relationship they had before. Again, with the number of Audis, Mercedes, Volkswagen that were being sold in Russia was significant. BMW. I know firsthand about BMW's efforts to counter the smuggling of cars from the United States that were being sent to Russia and then being resold. It was costing BMW a lot of money. But now they've turned to China and to internal brands. The Russians used to build pretty crappy cars. Not anymore. Europe, I described Europe as a little dog, a chihuahua, with no teeth. They have an annoying bark. They crap all over the floor. But in terms of usefulness and being able to do anything, they're useless. We don't, the United States doesn't need them. This really, I think this is, let's say it's the war between the United States and the European Union. European Union is an artificial creation. You put Russia, France, and Germany combined, they're incapable of taking on Russia. All of Europe is incapable of taking on Russia. It's a pipe dream. Hungary and the Slovak Republic being two of the principal examples. The EU claims it is going to do X, Y, and Z. It doesn't even have an army. It doesn't have any military. But we're going to challenge Russia. Good luck with that. You saw Trump even make fun of Starmer he did it in a polite way, but they tried to Starmer wanted to get the United States to say, hey, you back us. We get into trouble, you come to our aid. And yeah, you don't need us. You're strong enough on your own. You can take on Russia, can't you? And Starmer was like, he didn't say no, but the answer is no. But they're hoping they're trying to figure out a way that they can trick Donald Trump into get him back in bed with them and go to war with Russia. Trump, I think, has decided, I'm not playing that game, I'm going in a different direction. So the West has created, I would argue, the West has created this, I'll call it the myth of communist subversion, the myth of a Russian subversion, that in order that we build up military resources, and we're the ones involved with going overseas and attacking other countries, not them. That's the story we tell. We create the story that, oh, he's going to recreate the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire, and plan that he's going to go around the world conquering countries. And what was the purpose of this entire Western effort to bring Ukraine into NATO? This wasn't a 1 month plan or a 3 month plan. This has been planned for years. And the United States has been working for years to try to subvert Russia. That's what was fascinating, is the West has always hid behind the justification of going after the Russians because they're subverting our government. Whereas I would argue we've created, I'll call it the myth of Russian subversion, because the Russians they've not been, they didn't need to take over the United States. They've got the largest land mass of any country in the world. They didn't need to take over the United States because they needed our natural resources. They're the number one country in terms of natural resources. They didn't need Lebensraum. They didn't need additional space for their population. Good God. They could easily accommodate the populations of Russia and India in the space, the land that Russia covers. But the West doesn't want to accept it. So we keep pushing it, and people keep believing it and keep dying as a consequence of it. Yeah. And how many countries has China invaded over the last 40 years? None. And throughout the history of China, going back 1,000 years, they've not been a warring country that's going out and attacking neighbors. Genghis Khan was not Chinese. Again, we've got to create, if you ever go to Hollywood and you try to pitch a movie, one of the key questions can be asked is, who's the villain? We need a good villain. Gotta have somebody you can play against. And that's what, the United States is like a bad Hollywood director. We're always looking to cast the villain. And the villain's either going to be Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, or all four. That's like the anti-superhero movie. All the bad guys come together to unite. There's an ulterior motive there too. Their belief is we got to deal with China, and we can't allow China and Russia to stay together. And I can't tell you the number of what I'd call intelligent, experienced Americans who are saying, oh yeah, this relationship between Russia and China won't last. It's just temporary. We're going to split them off. We'll split off Russia. Russia will be with us against China. I keep saying, you're crazy. Not going to happen. But look, we got a whole package. We got a long list of enemies that no matter what happens in the world, we're going to trot out one of them to justify. We got to add another $50 billion to that defense budget. We're going to bring it close to $1 trillion. Just when you step back and realize the amount of money that the Chinese and the Russians combined spend on national defense is about 1/3 of what the United States is spending. It's incredible. And what's fascinating is Trump will talk positively about Putin and positively about Xi. But in terms of his other members of his administration, it's quite hostile towards China and towards Russia. And a lot of the movement to try to withdraw out of Europe is seen as shifting military assets away from Europe towards Indo-PACOM into the Pacific theater in order to be targeted at China. That probably actually, that became apparent right after World War II when the Suez Crisis, when the Brits and French got together with the Israelis and tried to take the Suez Canal. And President Eisenhower basically bitch slapped them and said, you get back in your corner. And they had to get back in their corner. He has not adjusted to the fact that Great Britain ain't great no longer. Just Britain. They are no longer a relevant player on the world stage. From the standpoint of the United States, if we disrupted trade with the UK, the average American wouldn't even notice. Because our top three trading partners are We're talking like $760 billion with the Chinese and the Mexicans and the Canadians. They're all up in triple digits. And Great Britain, the total is like 180 billion. It's a lot of money, but it's nothing compared to the over like the $3 trillion of trade, almost, or $2.6 trillion in trade that the United States does with Canada, Mexico, and China. That was when the world would finally clear that Britain was just a support. They were a support actor. It'd be like it would be like having. They once were the lead actor. They were the star. They were the Sean Connery or the Tom Cruise. Now they're the support actor. They're Hopalong Cassidy. There's somebody that shows up to support the main character, but they aren't the main character. And they aren't the main character militarily or economically. Britain's no longer relevant. That's the uncomfortable message for them. I think what Trump was really trying to do was to have at least created a paper relationship that could be used to persuade Ukraine that they would have a security relationship without any military power behind it, which sounds oxymoronic. So that when Zelensky entered that Oval Office with his one goal in mind, compel the United States to provide a security guarantee. And Trump had already faced that routine from both Keir Starmer and from Emmanuel Macron earlier in the week, on Thursday and then on Monday from Macron. And he had politely turned them down. That's why they came to get that. They didn't get it. So here was Zelensky, and just the basic common sense. Keep the saying I learned in Argentina, el pez, the fish dies by its mouth. You saw it on display there. Boy, all he had to do was keep his mouth shut, say thank you very much, and he actually would have walked out having secured some minor advantage. But Zelensky and he's gonna stick with this project until he's dead. It'd be interesting to see if he physically survives, and is allowed to go into exile. But the Europeans are certainly egging him on to stay in the fight, keep it up, while Europe's making all these ridiculous promises that they can't keep. And I think the real moment came when he started saying to JD, what an arrogant, when you're in that kind of setting, it is common courtesy to Mr. President, as JD did with Zelensky. He didn't say, hey, you shriveled little dwarf. He could have gone that route, but he didn't. Kept it high road. Mr. President, I beg to differ. And Zelensky he doesn't have to like J.D. Vance, but at least respect the damn office. He didn't even do that. Trump thought he had a deal. And it's not just Trump saying that. You've had Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury. Got Marco Rubio, for heaven's sake. He is really the strong defender of Trump and what Trump's tried to do and what's going, and been reporting in a very candid way the nature of the transactions and difficulties with Zelensky. That's nothing new. That's been the case since he started running for president, with the exception of his first, when he declared in 2015, and for the next 10 months, let's say he had a bit of a media honeymoon because they found him entertaining. They didn't take him seriously, didn't think he would win. And then once it became clear that he was going to be the president, boy, they turned all guns on him and tried to kill him, metaphorically. And then in this last go-round, literally tried to kill him. Some people have argued that this was staged. I don't think it was staged per se. I do think that there were some elements Trump fully intended to let everybody see he's going to pull the curtain back. He wanted everybody to see how the sausage was being made. And there were some signs that this was not going to be a warm meeting, just the fact that the fireplace was kept unlit in the background. It was still winter in the United States, but didn't turn on the fire. And then you wound up with a metaphorical fire blazing away in the Oval Offices. The temperature rose as a result of the anger that both Trump and Vance felt. I was talking with one of my CIA buddies, retired, but he's still in touch with people who are active. And he told me of a conversation he had with one friend, because my friend was saying, we just got to shut her down and start all over. And the friend who's still working for years had said, no, we can reform. And just this last week, the friend came back to him and said, you're right. This place needs to be burned to the ground. We need to start all over. But what you have right now, in my view, is a corrupted analytical rank that are incapable now of suddenly being able to turn around and objectively report and tell the president, tell the director of national intelligence, tell the director of intelligence what's going on. The fact that you've got so many analysts compromised, refuse to speak the truth about what's going on, refuse to accurately report to the president or up their chain of command. And I understand why many didn't. They wanted to keep their jobs. They didn't want to risk being ostracized. They want to be part of the cool kids club. It was a failure for the Brits. Trump didn't sell out on his commitment to end Ukraine. So there's the bottom line. The British press, I put an article up at Sonar 21 where I quoted a variety of different outlets in Britain. And boy, they were giddy. Oh my God, we're not going to get tariffed. Oh, this is wonderful. Starmer really charmed the pants off of Trump. Now, I don't deny that Trump has a strong narcissistic element to his personality. But frankly, I'm not aware. I think the last president we had that wasn't driven by narcissism was probably Gerald R. Ford. And before Ford, it was Harry Truman. Otherwise, most everybody else that gets in the office, they thought they were something special. And Trump clearly thinks he's something special. And from the British perspective, tariffs on their exports would have been devastating, because I think the United States is their number one export market. So in the scheme of things, the British economy is really dependent upon exports to the United States. That could be a killer. And they've already got problems. They grew in the latest quarter like 0.1%. Which means they're not growing. They're stagnating. That was a primary objective. But then the other objective was get Trump to back us in Ukraine. And he essentially said no, but he did it in a very polite way. Oh man, Starmer, if I had your accent, God, I would have been president long ago, man. People would have loved me because that accent, they'd think I'm really smart. He was saying things like that. What Trump did for the Brits in that meeting was say, okay, yeah, initially we're going to lump you in with all the Europeans and tax you, but we got a special relationship with you. You're our really good friend. It sounded a little bit like that used car salesman. Hey, you're just not anybody. You're somebody special, and because you're special, I'm going to give you a deal. That was what Trump was doing. So it was. We'll see what happens today with Zelensky. I anticipate Trump, what I call the smoke machine, will be on, and they'll be blowing it up into his nether regions, and it'll probably be a very cordial. Oh, we're with you. We support you. We're with you to the end, except you're going to have to pay for everything going forward, number one. And number two, no more free dough from us. So you get that from the Europeans. We fully back the Europeans supporting you with everything. Zelensky's got no cards to play. Now, what was interesting also in the meeting is that J.D. Vance brought up the point about, hey, you guys don't have free speech. And, what I said at the Munich Security Conference applies to you too. And Starmer, oh, we've got a long tradition of free speech. Oh, that's nonsense. Zelensky didn't get into office because he was such a great guy and a visionary philosopher and politician. He was put there because he was one that could be manipulated, could be controlled. And the wealthy Ukrainian oligarchs that backed him, they had something else in mind. And if he crosses them, they will kill him. He keeps that in the forefront of his mind. But he's also, he really has lost touch with reality. And I know from friends who were involved with this process before that despite public claims that Trump doesn't read and Trump doesn't pay attention, what I was told by somebody who had been involved with briefings for both George W. Bush, Barack Obama,
and then Donald Trump, said that of the three, Trump was the one who was always the most engaged, asked the most probing questions, and paid the most attention. If Tulsi's giving him good product, then Trump is paying attention to it. And that is, it's like trying to turn a giant aircraft carrier with a small rudder. It's going to turn slowly, but I think the turning has started. And she, by virtue of overseeing the production of the presidential daily brief, is, I think, taking a very active role to make sure that the very best intelligence is put in front of